exists, probably started a long time ago. We're going to spend some time this hour talking with you about it. What do you think?
Well, that's a very large topic, and in order to explain it, I need to give a little bit of a history lesson.
Okay.
And if we go back to eons of time ago, we find out that the solar system as it exists today is not the way it used to be. In fact, Earth used to be the second planet in orbit from the sun, and it was basically covered in water. Even the atmosphere was very liquidy. Mars was the third planet, and then there was a larger planet which is called Maldek, which existed between what is now Mars and Jupiter. And then after Jupiter was Saturn, then Uranus, Neptune, and that was it. Pluto did not exist. And then I need to go to another part of the galaxy, to a place called the Lyrian star system.
Okay. How far? How many light years?
Oh, gosh, I have no idea, but it's towards the center of the galaxy.
Okay.
The Lyrian star system, for all intents and purposes, is where humanity began. That is the home area of all of humanity. There was also a star system called the Draco star system, and that was basically a reptilian empire. And the reptilians have a mindset where they feel an obligation to seek out and destroy or assimilate all other creatures or species, because they feel the reptilian life form is the most perfect representation of God or God mind. And the reason that they feel that way is because reptilians in the Draco star system are androgynous, meaning male and female in the same body. And so they feel that most closely represents the neutral God mind or God energy. Also, reptilian DNA does not change over eons of time. It basically stays the same and does not alter, whereas mammalian DNA constantly changes and adapts as environments change. And so they feel that because reptilians are so stable in genetics, it proves that they're superior. And again, I'm not qualifying this by saying this is right or wrong. I'm just saying that that's how they think. And so they attacked the Lyrian star system and basically dispersed any of the survivors that were in there. And the survivors of the Lyrian star system fanned out across the known galaxy and colonized other solar systems, this one included. When they came here, the planet Mars and the planet Maldek had atmosphere, oceans. It was a very inhabitable environment, and they started colonies there. The reptilian Dracos followed them across the various colonies and attacked them. The Draco use hollowed-out asteroids or comets as weapons and vehicles that they then send into space. And what they did was send an ice comet into our solar system to attack and destroy the colonies. As that ice comet came into the system, it caused the planet Uranus to flip on its axis. Uranus is the only planet known that orbits in a north-to-south direction instead of an east-to-west as all other planets do, and that's because it was knocked off of its original axis. It then continued towards in the solar system and approached the planet Maldek, and the pressure or the gravitational pull of the ice comet, planet Maldek, and the large gas planet Jupiter caused the Maldek to explode, which is why we have the asteroid belt now between Mars and Jupiter.
Okay.
And a lot of the fragments of Maldek became the many moons of Jupiter and Saturn as they get caught up in the gravitational fields. And in fact, the rings of Saturn recently have been exposed as being pieces of ice and rock, which could have come from Maldek and the ice comet.
So it must have been a pretty good-sized planet, Stuart.
It was a very fair-sized comet. And Maldek was a very large planet. I would say it was somewhere between the size of Mars and Jupiter. And then, as the comet approached Mars, it pulled a lot of the atmosphere off of Mars and a lot of the oceans off of Mars. And then finally went into an orbit with the planet Earth and it went into this rotation with the Earth so that the oceans on Earth started to polarize, and the spinning of the Earth started to form the ice caps, and eventually the Earth and this ice comet switched places so that the ice comet became the second object in the orbit of the Sun, and the Earth was pushed out to third position. The ice comet became the planet Venus as we know it now.
All right, and this was very similar to what Velikovsky believes, right?
Well, that's true. His theory was very, very, very correct for the most part. Now, because the planet Venus, or the ice comet, was so close to the Sun, it caused the ice to melt, but rapidly to the point where it became steam and vapor, which is why Venus is covering clouds.
Okay.
And now the Earth, being pushed out into the third position, now became very inhabitable. Land masses appeared, and the Draco drove another vehicle into orbit of this planet to colonize it, and we now call that object the Moon. The Moon, as you know, does not spin in space as other natural objects.
Are you saying the Moon is artificial, or it's natural, but it was pushed there?
It was a hollowed-out object, a natural object that was driven into orbit around the Earth.
All right.
So it was a vehicle that was of a natural origin.
Okay.
Yeah, and then that's why only one side of the Moon faces the Earth at all times. It doesn't spin. It's like a vehicle parked in space, which is basically what it is. And if you send a sonic resonance off the surface of the Moon, it pings like a hollow object. It does not thump like a solid object.
I've heard that. That's true.
Yes, and even now, we're starting to get a little bit of information. They're saying, well, there's a little bit of an atmosphere on the Moon. There's a little bit of water on the Moon. And Mars used to have oceans, and they're starting to just reveal some information that I've been talking about for years, which is basically verifying everything that I've been telling people all these decades.
That's a remarkable story, and, there have been glimpses of this. Are you familiar at all, Stuart, with the work of Zecharia Sitchin?
Yes, of course.
Now, where does his work come in terms of that planet that comes here, Nibiru? You didn't mention that.
Yes, you see, here's the other thing. That Nibiru, which is also in some cultures called Marduk, this is also an artificial object which has an elliptical orbit in space. It is controlled by another type of reptilian being. It is not the Draco, but it's actually a different species.
The Anunnaki, he said, right?
Yes, and what we learned at Montauk was that group was actually enemies of the Draco, and that they were antagonistic towards each other. Now, interestingly enough, back in 1999, I believe it was in LA Times and possibly also in the New York Times, there was an article stating that a large object NASA had detected past the orbit of Pluto in an elliptical orbit around our sun, and that we can expect to see that object come closer to the Earth around the year 2003. That was back in 1999. And as usual, when the New World Order government sends out information that they want people to know, they send it out in a little blip like that, and then you never see it again. And that's kind of their legal out, that they told you everything and that it wasn't a surprise.
Now, where did this information come to you? How?
Well, when we worked in Montauk, those 13 years that I was there was a lot of indoctrination. We were basically told that what we were doing was for the good of the Earth, that humanity was not intelligent enough to control itself, that if people were left to their own device, they would pretty much destroy the planet. And so it was an obligation of this New World Order to control things, to ensure that our people continued and survived. They gave us these pieces of history and information that were to encourage us also to continue the work. But remember that what we were trying to do, or what they made us do and what they turned me into, is that they were trying to create a person who could see into other realities without the use of a device. And in that mode, they recalibrated the way the brain perceived realities. I was physically blind for 29 years. I could not see physical reality the way a normal person could see. I could only see energy fields, colors, and symbols, etc., which is how I do my readings and consultations. And so when we would do our work and be projected into other dimensions and realities, we would see this information, especially when we did time travel work, where we could then go back or forward and see exactly what the situation was at any specific time. And time travel really isn't as unusual as people think it is. If you know about science, every point in time and space has a unique vibration or energy.
Okay, now I'm going to come back to time travel with you next hour, but then are you saying the first colonists on this planet were the reptilians?
Yes, I'm sorry for diverting from that, but absolutely. Right. The first beings, the first colonies here were reptilians. Therefore, they consider this to be their planet, and that we, humans or mammalians, are the alien invaders. Mm-hmm. And so they colonized a very large landmass on the planet that appeared out of the oceans, and that has been called in various cultures either Lemuria or Mu.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and that existed in what is now the Pacific Ocean, and that culture lasted for many, many millennia, and they developed large cities, a high technology, and basically were preparing the planet for an assimilation into the Draco Empire.
What year might that have been in terms of our knowledge of time?
That would have been close to about 800,000 BC.
800,000. High technology.
Very high technology. They brought that with them. And now I need to go back into planetary science to explain why humans came here.
Okay, and then how?
Well, yes. When molten material is ejected from a star to form a planet, that molten material is thrown out into deep space and starts then to spin. And as it spins, it starts to cool off on the surface, and the surface starts to harden. But just as what happens on the surface, on the outside happens on the inside. The centrifugal force of the spin causes the molten material inside to start pushing against the sides of this now a sphere that is forming. And so a hollow area forms inside such a planet, and the extra material is forced out through openings at the poles. And then the inside starts to harden, as does the outside, because of the coldness of space. So what you then have is a planet with a hardened outside, a hardened inside, and molten material trapped in between the inner and outer mantles. In the very center of the hollow area is leftover molten material, what sometimes is referred to as an inner sun. But it's not really a sun, it's molten material. And then the openings at the poles still exist because that's where some of the molten material was ejected. And that is basic planetary science, and a lot of the planets in this solar system, including Earth and Mars, were formed that way. And so when Mars was affected by that ice comet, the colonists went to the inside of the planet in order to have safety. And so some of those colonists wanted to come to this planet as a refuge, and a lot of the other colonies that were created from the refugees of Lyrae also needed a place to come. So it wasn't until very many millennia later that mammalians or human beings came to the Earth and colonized an area that was in now the Atlantic Ocean, and that was called, in certain cultures, Atlantis.
Atlantis. Okay, so I'm beginning to see, Stuart, just with this picture, if the reptilians were in the Pacific on Lemuria, and the human-likes were on Atlantis, and now they're both gone, I'm beginning to see the picture of some kind of major confrontation. Am I
exactly
right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Mammalians and reptilians are not designed to live in the same environment on the same planet. They have different requirements. So we basically have a situation where there's two different species that are very antagonistic towards each other, sharing the same location. So, as you can imagine, there were hostilities between Lemuria and Atlantis that went on for a very long period of time. And in fact, the Hindu Vedas talk about this. Some of these Vedas are 200,000 years old and talk about what we would describe as nuclear weapons and lances with mushroom clouds that form on the earth, and talk about vehicles called vimanas that are what we would call spaceships or UFOs that would fly into the atmosphere.
Good point. So they annihilated each other.
Well, what really happened was, ultimately, the Atlanteans first killed off the dinosaurs. Now, the dinosaurs are to the Draco what mammalian creatures are to humanity. So there was very big battles, and of course the dinosaurs were not killed off by a meteor that struck the Earth 60 million years ago, because if that did happen, we wouldn't be talking right now. There wouldn't be anything left of this planet. That's a cover story. It was the Atlanteans who basically killed off the dinosaurs.
Okay, why did they want to kill off the dinosaurs, even though they looked similar to the reptilians?
Well, you know, look what's happening to us now. If you want to destroy humanity, kill the food source, kill the support structure for that culture.
Did they eat dinosaurs, the reptilians?
Yes, they did.
That
was their source of food, work.
Okay.
You know, that to them, like we have cows and horses and other mammalian creatures, they had those creatures. And so basically what happened was the Atlanteans used geomagnetic technology to destroy Lemuria and cause it to sink into what became the Pacific Ocean. And the only remnants of that now are the Hawaiian Islands, Japan, Philippines, Taiwan, Indonesia, Australia, New Zealand, the South Pacific Islands, and the California west of the San Andreas Fault Line is also.
And what happened to all the reptilians who were on that landmass at the time?
And now here's the interesting, the ones who survived went inside the Earth, the hollow Earth. And that began the legends of demons under the Earth or hell under the Earth. That's where that began.
So when you think of the devil, you do think of a reptilian type, horned with a tail.
Living under the earth.
That could be what the reptilians look like. They look like the devil, or the devil looks like them.
Exactly.
And they look, it's right, and they're in the hotter part of the planet, in the inner core, down below. It makes sense. That's where Hades is.
Yes, and that's where those legends began. And the Atlanteans, contrary to a lot of New Agey information, actually were not very nice people either. They also had an agenda of genetic manipulation. They used to blend different species together to see the kind of results. Basically, they tried to create workforces made out of animals and humans, animals and insects, etc., etc. The legends of merfolk, for example, are when they took dolphins and mixed them with humans. Sasquatch or Bigfoot was the result of bear mixed with humans.
How about mermaids?
Same thing. That was dolphins mixed with human genetics.
Okay. So that's where
and that's curious. Interesting, because people with autism really are descendants of that hybridization process, because they have dolphin genetics, and autism is really being a dolphin in a human body for all intents and purposes. So that's another topic.
This is wild stuff, Stuart.
Well, it sounds wild if you haven't heard about it, but if you look at it and study it and you see the science behind it, it does make a lot of sense.
What happened to the Atlanteans?
Well, they basically, over a series of 3 cataclysms, destroyed their own continent, which sank beneath the ocean, became the Atlantic Ocean. The only remnants left of that are the Azores, Canary Islands, the Caribbean Islands, Bermuda. And interestingly, Montauk Point is the end of an archipelago that used to exist of Montauk.
All right, stay with us, Stuart. More to come when we come back on Coast to Coast AM. Stuart, where the reptilians went underground, which then was perceived to be hell, and they the devil and evil, and it just incredible. It does make sense.
Yes, and, it continued after that, because when the Atlanteans finally destroyed themselves, and they also scattered around the earth and created the Egyptian civilization, the Greek, and even it went into North and South America, Then, a few thousand years after that, the reptilians decided to retake the surface of the Earth, but because of their appearance and so much time had passed, humans were not used to them any longer and considered them to be frightening. So what they did was create a hybridization program. And the hybridization program basically was for the reptilians to take back the surface by breeding and intermarrying with the human population. But I need to go back just one more time to when a peace negotiation was in process. And during that time, they decided to create a new type of being on the planet that would be a mixture of reptilian and human.
And this was prior to the devastation.
Right, this was prior. This was an attempt at peace between the two.
Okay.
And that, the thing is, the deal was the reptilians wanted to take the foundation as the androgynous reptilian body and then add mammalian or human genetics to it. And now this is interesting because in the Bible it says, and people never question this, it says in Genesis, let us make man in our image. And so why is it plural? Who is the we and who is the our? And in ancient Hebrew, all references to God are plural. There are no singular references to God as an individual. It is always plural. And if you look at the way human beings gestate in utero, you see that in the first few weeks of life, they are basically androgynous reptilians. And then mammalian features are added to it during the gestational period. And that's because the genetics are following the sequence in which they were added. So all we have to do is look at how human fetuses develop to see how we start as androgynous reptilians and then finally become mammalian.
Could this genetic manipulation, could that have been where the story of Adam and Eve occurred?
Absolutely, and the allegorical story of how Eve was created from the rib of Adam is basically about how an androgynous reptilian body was broken down into male and female components. That's an allegorical story of Adam and Eve.
Should have asked one of our guests last night who believes he's the reincarnated Adam.
I see. Well, we all are in some way, aren't we?
Yeah, well, I guess we are. Okay, so some of the stories that we hear about in Genesis, the fallen angels, the taking of women, earth,
yes,
that could have been the reptilians coming down to interbreed, right?
Correct, and even the Hebrew word Elohim means those who descend from above.
Mm-hmm.
It's a reference to basically that's what we would call people that come down in spaceships.
Okay, how many reptilians fled underground after the devastation? What do you think?
My estimate, or the estimate that we've been told over the years at Montauk, was approximately 3 million. But I can't verify that number, obviously. That's just what we were told.
Okay.
And that they did, because they're androgynous, they replicate on a parthenogenic basis. They don't need any spouse. They just create during a cycle and give birth.
Are they underground now?
Yes, they are still there. And, if you look at current events and you look at China and other areas where all of these mining accidents are occurring and people are dying underground, I know that a lot of those mining accidents are cover stories about what's going on underneath the ground where the reptilians are battling human beings. And this occurs even here in North America, where we have over 130 underground bases in this continent, and there's a lot of battling going on under the ground, and especially in the Mojave.
Are there flying crafts still around that belong to the reptilians?
Yes, there are, and I do have to say that a large percentage of the so-called UFOs that we see that are reported in this planet, many of them come from here. There are not so many from elsewhere, but many come from from our planet.
Who has the higher technology, the reptilians or Earthlings, I guess?
Both. We have government craft, and we also have the reptilian craft. And we have, of course, a mixture of others that come here. But for the most part, There's only 4 or 5 alien civilizations now that interact with this planet that are allowed to come here. There used to be a lot more years ago, and that's been stopped because of the government taking over a lot of the control systems of interactions with aliens.
Are we interacting now with the reptilians, or are we at war with them?
That is a very good question, because the Illuminati, who are basically the descendants of the hybridization program, have their own agenda, and their agenda is a bit different than the original reptilian agenda.
Okay, so we're getting into a little David Icke a little bit, right?
Yes, his information is very good. You know, he's a friend of mine, and we've talked about shape-shifting and how it occurs. If you'd like, I'll give you a brief description of shape-shifting. When a person has a split of 50-50 genetics, in other words, 50% reptilian, 50% human.
God, what would you look like at a 50-50 split?
Well, that's the thing, is what would the genetics defer to? It goes by the mind pattern or the soul personality operating the body. So, for example, if you have a reptilian soul personality in such a body, the body would defer to reptilian genetics and manifest as a reptilian. If you needed to hide behind a human form, and you needed to be in public as a human, but you had this reptilian body, the only way to maintain the human form is by ingesting human hormones, blood, organs, etc., that would then jump or boost the human genetics to manifest in that form instead. And that is why many of these Illuminati societies have these sacrificial rituals or sexual rituals where they bring up the human harmonics or energies so that they can maintain the human form.
Some people I've looked at have what I've always thought to be reptilian-looking eyes.
Yes.
Can they, these shapeshifters, can they hide the eyes?
Yes, they can, but you know, when they get very angry or they get very intense, the eyes shift. And you can see this a lot.
They get yellow or they get black.
And they look like slits, you know, instead of the round pupils. And you can see that this happens sometimes on TV. If you look at sometimes some of the government officials when they're speaking, on occasion you can see that happen briefly. And you have to ask yourself, and you look at all these skin conditions that these leaders have, where suddenly they're going to the hospital, getting skin lesions removed, etc., etc. And that's when you shapeshift frequently, the body then starts to lose the genetic memory of what shape am I. So very often when they go back to human form, there's a spot or two here or there that maintains reptilian form, and then they have to cover that up.
Give me a painted picture here, Stuart, of what a reptilian looks like.
There are...
I'm picturing a crocodile. Maybe that's not right. Huh?
Well, that's not exactly right, but we know that there are 7 different species within the Draco Empire or hierarchy. And interestingly, when the Soviet Union sent a vehicle to Venus in the 1980s to actually go below the cloud layer and shoot pictures before the heat destroyed the camera,
right,
it sent back a picture of the surface with 7 domed areas in a row.
We never saw those pictures.
We didn't see the pictures, but in American newspapers, there was an article on it in the late 1980s that said that there were these 7 domed areas, and it went on and on to describe them as being unusual. And then the very end, as par for the course, it said that NASA determined that these 7 domed areas were natural formations. Of course, they're not going to say what they really are. If you know about reptilian culture and you know about the 7 species and there's a hierarchy, they don't mix together, it would make very good sense that when you colonize an area, you have separate living quarters for each of the species. And so the different species look like the very high or elite group are very tall, white-skinned reptilians with blue eyes, and they sometimes have been known to have wings on the back. Reptilian-type
skin?
Yes. It's not exactly as scaly as you'd see on a crocodile or an alligator, but it's very rough skin that looks as if it's segmented in places.
What about their faces?
The faces can look very human-like or humanoid. They have 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, but the reptilian have that what I call cat eyes. They look like cat eyes, and they have a very pronounced jaw and very pronounced teeth. And they have very powerful bodies, especially the elite group, the top of the hierarchy. And when you go down the hierarchy to the bottom, there's a shorter version. There's a kind of reptilian that's only 4.5 feet tall. It's kind of brown skin, very slight. They're very much like workers or drones that would do the grunt work or the what we would call the untouchables in Hindu society.
All right. Well, this picture that we've all seen of the devil, who could have been a reptilian, where did that come from? The longer tail and the horns.
That comes from the ancient perception of what a reptilian being looks like, and very often they do have horns. Not all of them